طيب. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحابته ومن استنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين وبعد. Inshallah ta'ala, we continue to our 14th hadith of the 40 hadith of Imam Nawawi. Inshallah ta'ala, let's get somebody to read the hadith. Let's get straight into it, inshallah. Do we have a mic here? Rio? Do we have a mic? Yeah, let's have somebody read the hadith. Can we get it up there, inshallah? Danielle, can you read it for us, inshallah? Hadith number 14, Bismillah.
Narrated from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "The blood of a man who is a Muslim is not lawful, i.e. cannot be lawfully shed, save if he belongs to one of three classes: a married man who is an adulterer, life for a life, one who is a deserter of his religion, and abandoning the community."
Excellent. Jazakallahu khairan. طيب. So this hadith is narrated by Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu. Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu, he said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said, لا يحل دم امرئ مسلم إلا بثلاث. That the blood of a Muslim is not halal. The blood of a Muslim is not lawfully spilt except in three cases. And those three cases that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam mentioned was, number one, الثيب زاني, a person who is a thayyib and he's a zani. والنفس بالنفس, and a soul for a soul, a life for a life. وَتَارِكُ لِدِينِهِ الْمَفَارِقُ لِلْجَمَاعَةِ, and one who leaves his religion and one who abandons the community. One who abandons the community and leaves religion. So let's talk about these three things, inshallah ta'ala. Now, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if you look at this hadith, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he is setting a standard here. Now keep in mind, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was the head of the state. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the head of the state addressing the Sahaba. And these laws were not enacted when it comes to, when it comes to capital punishment. These things were not enacted in the Meccan phase, right? In the Meccan phase, the Prophet ﷺ never had any of these public punishments like that in the Meccan phase, in the first 13 years of his prophethood, right? These things were only enacted when he moved to Medina. Now, obviously, the reason is because the Prophet ﷺ in Medina, he had the authority to enforce whatever rules he wanted to enforce, right? Enforce the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at a state level. So because of that, you find that when it comes to capital punishment, when it comes to governing a society as a whole, all of those rulings and all of those ahkam, they came into effect in the Medinan period. Right? It's very important to understand. So that's why, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he's addressing the Sahaba with these things, when he's addressing the Sahaba with hudud, with the capital punishments, we understand that this is in the Medinan period, not in the Meccan period. So we know that this is a time where the Sahaba, that they had a firm ground in Islam. As Aisha radiallahu anha, she said that if the first thing revealed was do not drink alcohol, do not commit zina, the people would say, we will never commit zina, we will never give up alcohol. But Aisha radiallahu anha, she said that the ayat came down, the short, concise ayat came down, reminding the people of, فِيهِ ذِكْرُ الْجَنَّةِ وَالنَّارِ, reminding the people of Jannah and reminding the people of the fire. Right? And then Aisha radiallahu anha, she said, until the hearts of the people, right? Until the hearts of the people became firm, that's when all of the halal and the haram, all of those other verses came down. So if you read the Quran, if you guys know, when you look at the back of the Quran, the end of the Quran, there's like a little table of contents. I don't know if it's in all of the mushafs, but at the end of it, there's like a table of contents, that shows you whether or not a surah is Makkiyah or Madaniyah, whether it was revealed before the Hijrah or after the Hijrah. So if you look at those verses of the Quran, if you look at those chapters of the Quran that were revealed after the Medinan period, you find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about divorce, Allah talks about marriage, Allah talks about finance, Allah talks about so many different things that you're not going to find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking about in the Meccan period. In the Meccan period, you find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those surahs, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking about the fire, Allah is speaking about Jannah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking about stories of the people of the past. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning verses to convince the people of His oneness, to worship Him alone. Not that those verses, not that those topics were not present in the Medinan period verses, but this was the focus of the Meccan period verses, right? Of course, they were mentioned, later on, even after the Prophet made hijrah. There are ayat in the Quran, that were revealed later on about Jannah, about the fire, about the stories of the people of the past, Okay, but it's very important to understand this so you can contextualize when the Prophet ﷺ is saying this and how he actually implemented these things. Right? Extremely important, because we have to realize that all of these ahadith that we're getting, they are telling us about events that took place within 23 years. 23 years. And to just read one hadith or to read one verse of the Quran without understanding Islam as a whole, then you're going to do yourself a big disservice when it comes to you understanding Islam as a whole. So that's why when it comes to people who want to speak badly about Islam, who want to attack Islam, they use things like this hadith, right? They use things like the hadith that we've mentioned, right? I've been commanded to fight the people until they say La ilaha illallah. We've already explained that. We don't need to get into that hadith again, right? Hadith number 8. Okay, we've already spoken about that. This hadith is in hadith number 8, the Prophet ﷺ, he said that I've been commanded to fight the people until they bear witness that there is no God worthy of worship except Allah, and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah ﷺ, and that they pray the salah and they pay the zakah, and if they do that, then they have protected from me their blood and their wealth. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned illa bihaqqil Islam, except for the rights of Islam, right? So that's what we're going to be talking about in this hadith. So the scholars, they mentioned that this hadith has a connection with hadith number 8. Right? When the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that if the people do this, they say La ilaha illallah, they say Muhammad Rasulullah, they pray the salah, they pay the zakat, then it's haram for anybody to touch their wealth and to touch their blood. And at the end of the hadith, hadith number 8, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned except for the right of Islam. What is the right of Islam that can cause a person to be punished in an Islamic country under the rule of the Prophet ﷺ, right? What did the Prophet ﷺ talk about in that hadith? That's what this hadith, hadith number 14, is addressing, right? Very important to understand this. So let's talk about and obviously we've already spoken about the sanctity of blood in general. This hadith is going to speak about the sanctity of a Muslim's blood in specific, right? Of course, to just go around and just kill anybody, obviously that's something haram and something wrong. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned that in the Quran, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has strictly forbidden just killing a soul for no reason without any right. So the thing is that in general, to kill somebody that is innocent, to kill somebody that's not fighting you, to kill somebody that's not a combatant against you, that's at war with you, that in general is something that's haram. But it's even worse when it comes to a Muslim, right? It's worse when it comes to a Muslim. Like I'm going to give you an example. Are we allowed to lie and to cheat the non-Muslims? Obviously not. Obviously not. But you know that when you get into a business deal with your Muslim brother, you expect that he's going to treat you good, right? And sometimes when you get into a business deal with your Muslim brother, it hurts even more, because when he cheats you and when he steals from you, what do we say sometimes, right? We say, yo, like, you're my Muslim brother. You're my Muslim brother. It's even worse now, because we're supposed to have that bond of brotherhood, right? Meaning, as a Muslim, I'm not supposed to treat you like a non-Muslim. We have that bond of brotherhood. So like I said, the general rule of just killing people, indiscriminately, that's something that's haram, that the scholars, they speak strongly against. But it's even worse. We're not saying it's okay when it's for a non-Muslim, but it's even worse. It's bad as it is, but it's worse when it comes to a Muslim. Is everybody clear on what I'm saying? It's worse when it comes to a Muslim. And even the Prophet ﷺ, he said to the Sahaba, he said, "La tarji'u ba'di kufaran." The Prophet ﷺ said, "Do not return after I die, after I am gone. Do not return to disbelief. Do not revert to being disbelievers. يَضْرِبُ بَعْضُكُمْ رِقَابَ بَعْضٍ." Right, striking the necks of each other, killing each other. So when it comes to killing, your brothers and sisters in Islam, this is something that the Prophet ﷺ, he strictly forbade. So at the beginning of this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he's setting up a standard here, right? A general rule is that when it comes to your brothers and sisters in Islam, you are not to touch their blood at all, right? And what do we find today? We find the people that it's so easy for them to go shed the blood of their Muslim brothers, right? Like I said, the general rule is even when it comes to the non-Muslims, it's the same rule. But it's even worse when it comes to Muslims, because you're supposed to have that bond of brotherhood. So this is what you find today. You find that you have a lot of these groups around the world who are claiming to support Islam. But what do? They end up killing Muslims. They end up fighting and killing Muslims. Like, that doesn't even make any sense. So the Prophet ﷺ, he's setting up a standard here that the blood of a Muslim is not halal. It's impermissible to spill, except in these cases. Except in these cases that the Prophet ﷺ is going to mention. So like we said, killing people in general is haram, but when it comes to killing a Muslim, it's worse. It's worse. And the Prophet ﷺ, he even tells in a hadith, إِذَا الْتَقَى الْمُسْلِمَانِ بِسَيْفَيْهِمَا, if two Muslims meet with their swords, try to picture this situation. If two Muslims, they plan to come to each other and they come to fight each other. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, فَالْقَاتِلُ وَالْمَقْتُولُ فِي النَّارِ. Then the one who kills and the one who is killed, they're both in the fire. They're both in the fire. Think about that. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that when two Muslims, did the Prophet call them, two kafiran? No, he called them إِذَا الْتَقَى الْمُسْلِمَانِ. When two Muslims, they're Muslims, they believe in Allah. They believe in the last day. The Prophet ﷺ, he's affirming that they're Muslims. When two Muslims meet together with their swords, both of them, they want to fight each other. So is this hadith talking about somebody who doesn't want to fight, but then a Muslim comes and kills him? No. This hadith is not talking about that. The Prophet ﷺ has said in this particular narration that when two Muslims meet, both of them coming with their swords, then the one who kills and the one who is killed, they're both in the fire. So, thinking about this, you may think about why are they both going to the fire? And this is what the Sahaba said. They said, O Messenger of Allah, هَذَا الْقَاتِلُ فَمَا بَالُ الْمَقْتُولِ. The Sahaba, they said, we understand about the one who kills, but how come the guy who was killed, he's going to go to the fire as well? He didn't kill his brother. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّهُ كَانَ حَرِيصًا عَلَى قَتْلِ صَاحِبِهِ. The reason why the guy who was killed, why he's also going to the fire, is because he was diligent upon killing his brother. The only thing stopping him was that he got killed. In other words, if he wasn't killed, he would have killed his brother as well. So because of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what is inside of their hearts. When two Muslims meet together, then the one who kills and the one who is killed, they will both enter the fire. Now obviously, if a person dies upon Iman, anybody who dies upon Iman will never enter the fire forever. And as I said, the Prophet ﷺ, he affirmed that they're Muslims at the beginning of the hadith, when two Muslims. So if they die upon Islam, even if they kill another Muslim and they go to the fire, eventually they will come out. It's a very important principle that whoever dies upon Iman as a believer, whoever dies believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that belief is accepted by Allah, that person will go to Jannah forever and never be removed. Or the second option is that the person may go to the fire for a limited amount of time, so that they can be purified of their sins. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will admit them into paradise. So, I have a question here. Will every Muslim enter Jannah? Will every Muslim enter Jannah? Some people are saying no, some people are saying yes. Why do you guys say no? Will every Muslim enter Jannah? No. Okay, it's a yes or no question, right? Will every Muslim enter Jannah right away? No. Will every Muslim eventually end up into Jannah? Yes. Is everybody clear here? So the way to understand this, if you're taking notes, this is a very good point to make. Will every Muslim enter Jannah right away? No. Will every Muslim enter Jannah eventually? Yes. And anybody who dies upon kufr, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the kufr of the hearts, and Allah knows the kufr, the disbelief of the actions as well. Whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that they die upon kufr, they die upon disbelief, right? They die in a state where they're not Muslims. Then will they ever enter Jannah? They will never enter Jannah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it very clear. Now obviously, your emotions may get the best of you here. Some of us, we may have family members who passed away upon Christianity. Some of us, we may have family members who died upon atheism, died upon Judaism, died upon whatever else ism there is. And it may be, hurtful, right? I mean, this is not something that we like. Nobody should like that anybody goes to the fire, but it's a reality. We don't put anybody in the fire. Allah does. That's not our job. If Allah says that He puts certain people in the fire, سَمِعْنَا وَأَطَعْنَا, we hear and we have obeyed. That's not our job. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah Al-Ma'idah, إِنَّهُ مَنْ يُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ فَقَدْ حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ الْجَنَّةِ. That whoever commits shirk with Allah, Allah has made it haram upon him to enter Jannah. Like, look at the wording that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used. Allah didn't say that they will not enter Jannah. Allah said that it's haram for them. Right? Like imagine you want to get something from me and I told you, you can't have it. Right? It's different if I say it's haram for you. You can never have it. Right? Because if I say that you can't have it, maybe later you can have it. Maybe right now you can have it. But if I say it's haram for you, then you know that you can never have that thing. Right? So if you think about like the amazing word choice that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used, that whoever commits shirk, then Allah has made Jannah haram for them. They will never enter it. So the thing is that obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He punishes because of His justice and because of His wisdom. Right? We must understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's forgiving and He's merciful, but He's also severe in His punishment. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also just. Right? So Islam is not a religion where you just believe in Allah, right? And you do whatever you want, and as long as you accept a certain you accept a certain belief, then you won't enter the fire in the next life. Islam is not a religion like that. Even if you die upon Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may place you in the fire. So that's why the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that if two Muslims meet with their swords, then the one who is killed and the one who kills, they will both be in the fire. Right? They will both be in the fire. So that's the severity of of shedding a Muslim's blood without any right. Like I said, I'm going to keep repeating this. The general rule is that if they're non-Muslims, they're not at war with you, they're not fighting you, they're not doing anything to you, they're leaving you alone, that it's haram to attack that person and kill that person. And the scholars are very clear when it comes to this particular issue. But it's even worse when it's a Muslim. It's even worse when it's your brother in faith. Is everybody clear on this? So that's the general rule. So now that we've established that general rule from the statements of the Prophet ﷺ, let's talk about these three cases. Case number one, right? The Prophet ﷺ mentions a thayyib zani, a person who commits fornication and he is thayyib. So the Prophet ﷺ, is he saying that any fornicator, any person who is intimate with the opposite gender in a haram way? Is the Prophet ﷺ saying anybody who commits zina, anybody who commits adultery? No. It's a specific qualification that's at the end of that word, and that is a thayyib zani. Right? And a thayyib, what is a thayyib? The scholars, they mentioned that a thayyib is somebody who is married or has been married. Everybody clear on this? A thayyib is somebody who is married or who has been married. So a person who commits zina and a person who is married or has been married in the past, then this person in Islam, they will get the punishment of stoning to death. Stoning to death. Now, when it comes to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, did the Prophet ﷺ stone anybody to death because of zina, because of fornication? Yes. Right? I know of two examples of this, and we're going to talk about those inshallah ta'ala. Right? We're going to talk about these two examples where the Prophet ﷺ had these two people stoned to death. Imagine how much of a punishment that would be. Right? How much of a punishment that would be, that you're standing there and people are just stoning you, and it's a very slow death. Right? One may look at that as a severe punishment. One may say that how could Allah subhanahu, people say this, how could Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy if this type of law is enacted in a Muslim country, according to the ideal Muslim country, right? So we're going to talk about that inshallah ta'ala. But let's just talk about this whole issue of who exactly gets this punishment in the first place. Then we're going to talk about the wisdoms behind it and how to properly understand it inshallah. So like we said, this is not for any person who commits zina. Not anybody who has an intimate relationship with the opposite gender gets this death penalty, the stoning to death penalty, right? Not everybody gets that. It's only if the person is married or if the person has been married in the past. So an example of this, if you're in a married relationship, you're a husband or wife, and you commit zina, then the Prophet ﷺ is talking about you in this hadith. If you have been married, you got divorced in the past, you're single right now, right? You're single right now, and you're looking to get married, and you commit zina with somebody, even though you're not married, but you've been previously married, then the Prophet ﷺ is talking about you in this hadith, right? So the word thayyib right here means a person who is married or has been married in the past. In other words, it's somebody who has had an intimate relationship in a permissible way. It's a person who has had an intimate relationship with the opposite gender in a permissible way through marriage, whether it's a current marriage or a past marriage. Okay, so from this we understand that it's not every person who commits zina that gets this punishment, that gets the punishment of stoning to death. Now, how do we understand this? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, and this is the general rule. Does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mention stoning in the Quran? Allah doesn't mention it in the Quran. In the Quran that we recite, you're not going to find any verse in the Quran that we recite that has a verse of stoning. You're not going to find it. Okay, but what we do find is, as I mentioned, the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned it in this hadith, right? That the blood of a Muslim is inviolable except in these three cases. So, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say about a person who commits zina in the Quran? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions at the beginning of Surah An-Nur, in the second verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, الزانية والزاني فجلدوا كل واحد منهما مئة جلدة. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that the female who commits zina and the male who commits zina, فَجْلِدُوا كُلَّ وَاحِدٍ مِّنْهُمَا, then whip both of them مِئَةَ جَلْدَةٍ, 100 times. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not mention stoning in the Quran. Allah mentions that the one who commits zina, whether he's a male or female, then what is the punishment? That he gets whipped 100 times. So, how do we understand this? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that the person who commits zina gets whipped 100 times. And, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said in this hadith that it's a person who is married. How do we understand that? The scholars, they mentioned that if a person is married or if they've been married, then they get the penalty of stoning. But if they're a single person who never got married before and they commit zina outside of wedlock, then they get the whipping. So let me just give you a couple examples. If you are a young person, you never got married before, and we're talking about a Muslim country here. During the time of the Prophet ﷺ, for example, if you live during the time of the Prophet ﷺ and you're like, I don't know, 18 years old or 20 years old, and you never got married before, but you've committed zina, then the punishment of zina in this case will be 100 lashes. Why? Because you never got married. But in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ is telling us who gets the penalty of stoning. And that's a thayyibu zani, a person who is married who commits zina, or a person who is previously married. So situation number 2, if you're in the time of the Prophet ﷺ and you're married now, and you cheated on your wife or you cheated on your husband with somebody else, and you commit zina, then you get the penalty of stoning. Right? Then you get the penalty of stoning. Is everybody clear on this? Or the third example is if you were previously married. Right, you got into a divorce now, you're a single, right? Like they say, single ready to mingle, right? Right? You're ready to mingle in a haram way, you get into a relationship, right? And you commit zina, and you're caught committing zina. You're caught committing zina, right? And the proofs have been established against you. Even if you're single, you can't be like, I'm single ready to, ready to mingle. You can't use that excuse. You can't say, oh, I'm supposed to get whipped because I'm not married. No. If you're previously married, then you get the penalty of stoning. Is everybody clear on this? Okay, so now that we understand who the Prophet ﷺ is talking about here, let's talk about how it happened during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. This is a hadith in Bukhari. There is a man, his name is Ma'iz. He was a Sahabi. So this man, Ma'iz radiallahu anhu, he came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said to the Prophet ﷺ that, O Messenger of Allah, I've committed zina. Right, I've committed zina, give me the punishment. Right? So the first example here, did the Prophet ﷺ, did anybody accuse this guy of committing zina? No, nobody accused him. He came to the Prophet ﷺ himself and he said, O Messenger of Allah, I've committed zina. Right, I've committed zina. So the Prophet ﷺ, he double checked. He double checked if this man is drunk, if this man is sane, is he really, does he mean what he's saying? Because sometimes somebody comes up to you and they may be drunk. And they may say, yeah, I committed zina. So the Prophet ﷺ, he made sure, he asked the people of this man, right? Is this man telling the, is he known for telling the truth and all of these things? And it's only after that that the Prophet ﷺ had the punishment of stoning inflicted upon this man. Is everybody clear on this? So during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, this man, he wanted to be purified of his sin. And the scholars, they mentioned that if a person has not been caught, then they can conceal the sin and they can make tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? But then again, in the akhirah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can choose to punish the person or forgive the person. But the scholars mentioned that a higher level is for somebody that if they committed the sin, then let them get the punishment in this life, so that saves them from getting it in the next life. So this man, he didn't want to hide it, he didn't want to keep it to himself and just make tawbah so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may punish him or forgive him in the akhirah. He wanted to get the punishment here in this dunya so that he will be saved from it in the akhirah. Right, and that's the severity of this hadith. I mean, the severity of this whole situation, because we're not talking about any crime here. We're talking about a crime that splits up families. We're talking about a crime that can ruin somebody's life for their entire life. You have some children that they don't even know who their parents are. You have some kids, they don't even know who their dads are. Of course, they know who their moms are sometimes, but they don't even know who their dads are. Why? Because of zina. Because there was no marriage. There was no witnesses. And as we know, a proper nikah in Islam has to have witnesses. So even if the husband does run away, the witnesses know who the father was. You look at the beauty of that. And that's why zina, when children are born through zina, a lot of the times you find that these children, they're in broken homes, they're in bad situations, they don't have that support from their family. So so zina in Islam, in a Muslim society, is a crime against the whole society. It's not just one act that you're doing out of pleasure, but there's a lot of repercussions that comes from it. It ruins a person's honor. It ruins the person's reputation of the entire family, if you think about it. Like imagine you as a father or a mother, right? Your child is now, your daughter or son is now popular for committing zina. Imagine how humiliated you would feel, right? So it's something that destroys society as a whole, right? And what do we find in our society? There's zina all around us, right? We're being encouraged to to engage in zina. I remember, I mean, there's some Muslim brothers and sisters, they're in school, and because they're not having any girlfriends or boyfriends, people think they're homosexuals, right? I remember one brother, he was saying that how, you know, he didn't have any girlfriends throughout like high school, so his grandmother asked him, are you gay? Right? So that's really the problem that we're going through, that if a person wants to stay away from zina and they would just want to get married and they want to do it the halal way, then it's like the person is weird, right? Like there's something wrong with them. But in an Islamic society, like look at the problems that we have in our society. So in an Islamic society, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed this matter, you know, that this would be the, you know, the repercussions of somebody committing zina in a Muslim society. Also, there was another, you know, there's another hadith where a woman came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and this woman, she was pregnant. She was pregnant through zina. And this woman, she also confessed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She confessed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she said, "O Messenger of Allah, I've committed zina. That I want to get the punishment." Right? I'm just paraphrasing her words and, you know, this hadith. But she said, "O Messenger of Allah, I want to get the punishment. I want to get the stoning." So the Prophet ﷺ, he commanded her to take care of the child, to deliver the child, and to breastfeed the child. And then the Prophet ﷺ, then he commanded that they stone her. But did anybody accuse this woman? No. She came up front and she said, "I want to get it here, not in the akhirah. I want to get the punishment here." So these are two examples that happened during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Now here's the question: how should this punishment even be instated? How should this punishment even be done in a Muslim society? Right? Is it for anybody to say, "Hey, my friend committed zina," and then they get stoned? Right? Is it for me to say, "Oh, my child or my cousin, he committed zina," and then he gets whipped? Is that how it works? No. There's a process that has to go through. And that is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, وَالَّذِينَ يَرْمُونَ الْمُحْصَنَاتِ ثُمَّ لَمْ يَأْتُوا بِأَرْبَعَةِ شُهَدَاءَ فَجْلِدُوهُمْ 80 جَلْدَةً وَلَا تَقْبَلُوا لَهُمْ شَهَادَةً أَبَدًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran that whoever accuses somebody who is chaste of zina and then they don't bring 4 witnesses, then whip that person 80 times. So brothers and sisters, if somebody accuses somebody of zina, if somebody says this person commits zina and they don't bring their 4 witnesses, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah An-Nur that person will get a punishment of 80 lashes. Right, of 80 lashes. So it's even severe if you try to accuse somebody of zina in Islam. If you accuse somebody of zina in Islam without any evidence, without any 4 witnesses, then you will get a punishment as well. So that shows that it is very important that you don't accuse anybody of any crime unless you have evidence for it. So from this verse of the Quran, we understand, the scholars mentioned that for the punishment of zina, whether it's whipping or stoning, for that to actually come into effect, 4 witnesses, 4 just witnesses must see the act taking place. They must see the act of zina taking place. Does it mean that you have 4 witnesses, seeing a man and woman holding hands? No. They have to actually see the act taking place, the actual penetration happening, right? The actual sexual intercourse happening in front of them. They have to walk in and they have to see it. And the scholars mentioned that these 4 people, they have to be upright individuals of the society. In other words, if you have 4 drunkards and they walk in and they see it, will their testimonies be accepted? Absolutely not. They must be 4 righteous people. 4 mashayikh has to walk in and they have to see that this act is taking place. Now Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, he mentions in one of his books, he said that this ruling of 4 witnesses, this has never ever happened in the time of the Prophet ﷺ up until his time. So Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, he mentioned that the punishment of stoning, right after it's been affirmed by 4 witnesses, this never ever happened in Islamic history. That's the claim that he's making. And if you look in Islamic history, it's really never happened that 4 upright people, they actually walked in and they saw the act taking place. Right? If 2 people, even if you've seen it, 2 people, they walk in and they see the zina taking place, they see the act taking place, even then the person will not be stoned or whipped. Is everybody clear on this? The person will not be stoned, the 2 people, they will not be stoned or whipped, because you need 4 witnesses in Islam. Right? And this is an issue that the scholars don't differ about. Right? So from this we can understand that there's a few ways where the punishment of zina can be affirmed. Number 1 is if the person confesses. If the person confesses, then they don't need any witnesses. They're saying, "I have done it, I want to get the stoning." Then 4 witnesses are not needed. But if a person is accused now, then the accuser must bring 4 witnesses. Only then can the punishment take into effect. Is everybody clear on this? Okay, so if you have somebody and they have been accused with zina, even if the person has seen the zina taking place, if they don't bring 4 witnesses, that person is getting whipped. right? That person is getting whipped 80 times. Okay, even if you've seen it taking place and you've accused somebody of committing zina and you want them to get the punishment in an Islamic, in an Islamic environment during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, you would be getting whipped, even if you've seen it, right? You need to bring those four witnesses for the punishment to take into effect. Now, like I said, this is to avert the corruption that can happen in society. Now, some of the scholars, they explain this. They say, for example, Ibn Taymiyyah, he mentioned that 4 witnesses have never seen zina taking place like this. And obviously, when people commit zina, they don't do it in the open. If people do it in the open, that's a different story. That's on them. But primarily, this is an act that takes place behind closed doors. Closed curtains and closed doors. So the thing is this has never ever happened. So the scholars, they explain, right, that if 4 witnesses have never ever witnessed this act taking place in Islamic history, and the only time you had people being stoned or whipped is if they've shown signs through pregnancy or they have admitted the action themselves, then what is the wisdom behind it? Behind having those four witnesses? The scholars mentioned that it's something that it's something that should ward off the act from a person. In other words, you as a Muslim, right? If you're living during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, or you're living under Islamic rule, you know that, man, if I'm about to commit zina, if I've been married, or if I am married, I'm about to get stoned. Like, imagine, like, you're definitely not going to want to get into something like that, right? And even if you do get into it, you're going to try to take so many precautions that it may not even be worth it. You're risking your life doing this act. Right? You're risking your life doing this act. Likewise, if you're not married, you've never been married, you're going to get those 100 lashes, right? So it's highly unlikely that 4 people who are just and upright members of society, they will walk in and they will see you doing the act. But it's just even the thought of that should divert you from committing the sin in the first place, right? So the scholars, they mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned this as a diversion so that people can rethink the situation, so that not only will they have a punishment in the akhirah, but they're going to have a punishment in this dunya for that act as well. Right, in this dunya as well. The second thing that the Prophet ﷺ that he mentioned is an-nafsu bin-nafs, and that is murder. If somebody kills somebody in Islam, the general rule is that if somebody kills somebody else in Islam, and it's been proven that this person committed that murder, people have witnessed it, they have evidences, CSI, whatever the case is, and it's been proven that a person commits murder, then in Islam, that person will get the same, that person will end up the same way that the person who they've killed ended up, meaning that they're going to get killed. They're going to get the death penalty. So anybody who commits murder in Islam, then they will get the death penalty in Islam. Okay, in Islam they will get the death penalty. Okay, so if somebody commits murder, I'm just going to give an example, right? For example, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that example at the beginning, right, where I mentioned that hadith. That if 2 Muslims, if they meet each other with their swords, then the one who kills and the one who is killed, they're both in the fire. Now, in an Islamic society governed by Islamic law, if the ruler, if it's proven that that one Muslim killed his Muslim brother, then he will be getting the death penalty as well. Right? For murder, he's going to be getting the death penalty as well. Now, the scholars, they mention an exception. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this in Surah Al-Baqarah. Now, the verse is a bit long in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions it, but we're going to paraphrase it, inshallah ta'ala. And that is that if a person commits murder, then the family of the murdered person, they have a choice to either enact the death penalty or take blood money from the murderer to spare his life, right? I'm just gonna give you an example, right? Within the past few months, Allahu A'lam, I don't remember when it was exactly, but there was this brother, and his son was murdered by a person, right? I'm pretty sure you guys have seen this on the internet, on Facebook and stuff like that. That somebody murdered this guy's, this Muslim brother. Somebody murdered his son. So, this went like really viral, even non-Muslims, this was like popular all over the internet. Where this Muslim, he said in the courtroom, he went over and he hugged the killer of his son. He hugged him and he said that I forgive you. Islam is about forgiveness, I forgive you. So the family in Islam, the family of the person who was murdered, they have a choice to forgive the killer, or to say, you know what, no, we're going to enact the death penalty upon him because it's been proven that he killed our family member. Okay, so there's 2 choices. The Muslim family, they have 2 choices: to forgive the person, right? To forgive the person, and obviously you're only gonna, be elevated in your status with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by forgiving somebody, right? So the Muslim family, they have a choice of forgiving the killer, or by saying we're not gonna forgive him, the death penalty, that's what he's gonna get. In the case that they forgive the killer, then the killer must supply the family with a blood money, right? With blood money. It's a sum of money that the family stipulates upon the killer, and then he must pay this sum to the family to compensate them for the killing of one of their family members. Is everybody clear on this? So that's when it comes to the Prophet ﷺ, that's when it comes to him saying an-nafsu bin-nafs, a soul for a soul, a life for a life. So that's that exception that the scholars mentioned. Now let's talk about the third one, and this is something that is very controversial. A lot of people don't like it to talk about, it. A lot of people they plain out just deny it, right? And that's not being honest. But the Prophet ﷺ mentioned the third case where a person will get the death penalty in Islam, and that is if they leave their deen and they leave the jama'ah, right? They leave their deen and they separate from the jama'ah. So let's talk about what that means, inshallah ta'ala. Now, we must understand a principle, and that's very important, and that is that in a Muslim society, the general rule is that everybody is a Muslim. In a Muslim society, everybody is a Muslim, except if there's evidence to show otherwise. Right? If somebody comes up to you and they look like a Muslim, they're giving you the salam, then you are to say that that person is a Muslim, and it's not permitted for you to say that person is a kafir except with evidence. And it's something very dangerous to claim that one of your Muslim brothers is a kafir. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said that whoever says to his brother, Ya kafir, O kafir, فَقَدْ بَاءَ بِهَا أَحَدُهُمَا, that word of Ya kafir is true for one out of the two of them. So if you say to your brother, "Oh kafir," and he's not a kafir in reality, then you know that statement is coming back to you. Right? That statement is coming back to you. So it's something very dangerous to accuse somebody who's a Muslim of being a non-Muslim. So the Prophet ﷺ, he's saying in this third example, a person, in this third situation, it's a person who leaves his deen. And you can't take anybody out of Islam. That's not your authority. Unless if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes that person out of Islam, or if the Messenger ﷺ takes that person out of Islam. So an example of this, if somebody commits an act of clear kufr, something that's major kufr that takes them out of Islam, then we can say that that person is a disbeliever. Not because we're saying it, but because Allah has said it. Because Allah has said it. Right? For example, if you see somebody worshipping an idol right in front of you, and he says he's Muslim, he's worshipping an idol, he's worshipping the cross, or whatever the case is, and he's clearly devoting himself to that to that thing or that God, and he is accepting it with his statement, he's not denying it, then you can't say that person is a believer. You can't say that person is a Muslim. He's not. Right? He's associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's an example where you can say a person is a That's a situation where you can say a person is a disbeliever because you have evidence and you have proof. But other than that, it's not permissible for you to say that anybody is a kafir. Anybody is a disbeliever unless you have that evidence. So we have to make that clear, because when the Prophet ﷺ, when he says that a person who leaves their deen, it's not for every Tom, Dick, and Harry to say this guy's a kafir, he needs to get the death penalty. It doesn't work like that, right? So in a Muslim society, it must be clearly proven. It must be clearly proven through the Muslim ruler that this person has left Islam. And another principle that we have to mention is that this punishment is only going to be enacted upon somebody who comes out as a kafir, somebody who has been proven as a disbeliever. I'm just going to give you one example. When it comes to all of these capital punishments in Islam, they must go through the authority. They must go through the authority. It's not for every single person to say, oh, this person commits zina, let me go whip them myself. This guy, he steals, let me cut off his hand. This guy does this, let me do this and that. No, it has to go through the Muslim ruler. It has to go through the authority, the Muslim state. So I'm just going to give you an example of this, right? In Bukhari and Muslim, in Abu Dawood, he narrates a narration that a man was brought to Ibn Mas'ud. A man was brought to Ibn Mas'ud, and this man, he had some alcohol dripping on his beard. Now we know during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ had the person who drank alcohol in public whipped 40 times. Whipped 40 times. So the people brought a man who had alcohol on his beard to Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. And the people said, oh, this man, he's drinking alcohol, so we need to give him the punishment at a state level. So Ibn Mas'ud, he said a very beautiful statement. He said, إِنَّا قَدْ نُهِينَا عَنِ التَّجَسُّسِ. Ibn Mas'ud, he said that we have been prohibited from spying. We have been prohibited from spying. And then he says, وَلَكِنْ إِذَا إِنْ يَظْهَرُ لَنَا شَيْءٍ نَأْخُذْ بِهِ. But Ibn Mas'ud, he says, but if something comes out clearly, then we can take that. Then we can mention a ruling on that. Then we can judge a person based on what is apparent and what is clear. But for you to say, oh, this person has alcohol in their beard, that they've drank alcohol, you don't have proof that they have actually done that. Just look at the beauty of the statement of Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, one of the companions. So Ibn Mas'ud said that even if this guy, he had alcohol on his beard, you don't know if he drank that. What if it spilled? So many different things could have happened. Now obviously it's highly unlikely. Obviously if somebody has alcohol in their beard, right, then they've been drinking alcohol. In most cases. Of course there could be cases, but it's highly unlikely. Now can you claim that somebody drank alcohol if you didn't see them drink it? No. That's how it's, that's the severity of claiming that somebody has committed one of these crimes in Islam. You can't say somebody committed zina if you just think that they're committing zina. Just because a guy and a woman, they're holding hands, you can't say that they're fornicating. You can't say that. Just because he kisses her doesn't mean that they're fornicating. Just because they're alone in the room and they may be doing everything else except the act, you cannot say that they're fornicating. Right? So that's something that is very serious when it comes to, claiming something without clear proof. So when it comes to this issue of somebody leaving Islam, it must be established by clear proof under the authority of a Muslim ruler. Now that shows, if you contemplate the statement of Ibn Mas'ud, you realize that it's not something that's like a witch hunt. That in a Muslim society you go around and like, oh, who's a kafir? Let's get him. Right? This guy, he's not making salah, let's go kill him. It doesn't work like that. Ibn Mas'ud, he said, even if the guy, he had alcohol on his beard, make an excuse for him. As long as you don't see it clearly, you can't make a ruling on that person. Say that he has drunken alcohol and then you have to whip him. Similarly, if somebody who you think is a non-Muslim, you have so many people that they have doubts as to the Islam of their brothers. They say, is this brother even Muslim anymore? You can never say that. As long as a person is Muslim and they pray the salah and they face the qibla and they eat the dhabihah, then they are Muslims. You can't person is kafir unless you have evidence to do so. So when it comes to a person who leaves his deen in a Muslim society, especially during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, this must be clear, this must be proven clearly, right, through the authority of the Muslim ruler. And it's not as if we're commanded to go around and spy on people to see who's a non-Muslim and who's not. Right? And as I've mentioned, that this has to be under the authority of a Muslim ruler, right? If you look, another issue to talk about is what if you're in a Muslim country, a non-Muslim country. What if you're in a non-Muslim country? You're living in a country, in a country that's ruled by a system other than the system of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For example, you're living in this country. Can we apply these rulings in this country? The scholars, they strictly prohibit that. And they mention many great evidences for that. Among those great evidences that the scholars mention why you cannot implement these capital punishments in a non-Muslim country is because the Sahaba during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, they lived in non-Muslim countries. If you look at Habasha, you look at Abyssinia, even through the the bulk of the Medinan period, the Muslims, when they were in Abyssinia, they never enacted these capital punishments in their society because they had no authority. So the scholars, they extrapolate from that a principle that if you're in a non-Muslim country, then you have no authority in the land to enact these punishments. So it's very important to understand this, because did it ever happen in the time of the Prophet ﷺ that the Sahaba, they moved somewhere else and then they went into a non-Muslim society and all of a sudden they started cutting people's hands off because they saw them steal, and they started whipping people because they're committing zina? It never happened like that. So the scholars mentioned that if you live in a non-Muslim country, like the country that we're living in, then these laws cannot be, they cannot be enforced or implemented, because you don't have any authority to do so. So what you will understand from this is that, in the news, a lot of non-Muslims, they use this to attack Islam, and that is honor killings. You guys have ever heard about honor killings? That, you have like some families, you have a mother and father, and they hear that their child has committed zina, and forget about 4 witnesses, forget about doing it under a Muslim ruler, right away they grab that child, right, that young brother or sister, and they kill them. Right? They kill them. And that's something that's murder in Islam. They have no authority to do so. So that's something that's clearly wrong. So when it comes to non-Muslims using stuff like that to prove Islam wrong and to make Islam look bad, it doesn't make any sense, because Islam speaks out against that stuff. The Sahaba, they never enacted these rulings in the non-Muslim countries that they lived in. Right? The only time that these punishments were enacted was during the time of the Prophet ﷺ under his rule, and under the Muslim rule after his death ﷺ. So that's something that's that's very important. So all of these situations that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, a person who is married who commits zina, or they've been previously married and they commit zina, then they will get that penalty of stoning. Only in a Muslim country under the Muslim ruler when it's been proven by those 4 witnesses or the person confesses, right? A life for a life. That's a second scenario. That's only to be done under a Muslim country. If it's, if you live in a non-Muslim society that enacts the same law, then that's the law of the land that you're living in. But if you're not living in a Muslim country and you're living in a non-Muslim country in which they don't enact these rulings, then you can't say, you know what, I'm the authority in the land and I'm going to do this. No, right? As long as you're living under the rule of non-Muslims, you can't enact these laws. And also the third one. If your friend at school, in college, your family member leaves Islam, you can't touch them. You can't touch a hair on their body. You have no right to do so. Right? You can't say, oh, my brother, he's an apostate. He became a Christian. He left Islam last week. Let me go find him and let me go kill him. Right? It's not to be done except under a Muslim authority in a Muslim country. And that's not the situation that we're in right now. Is everybody clear on this? And like I said, the proof of that is the Sahaba never did these things. They never enacted these laws when they lived in non-Muslim countries, even during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, right? So that's the main, one of the main proofs that the scholars use, and also because of the corruption that's going to spread in society, right? I mean, look how many Muslims are ignorant that, many Muslims don't even know what, like for a lot of people, it's the first time that they're hearing a lot of the things that I'm saying. Right? So look at the ignorance that's widespread in society. And on top of that ignorance, now you want to have every Tom, Dick, and Harry, implement these laws. Right? Implement these capital punishments in a non-Muslim society where there's no Islamic courts. There's no Islamic courts at all. It doesn't make any sense. Right? It doesn't make any sense because of that ignorance and because of that lack of authority in the non-Muslim lands. So inshallah ta'ala, the last point that I wanted to mention is somebody may have a problem with this, right? They may have a problem with, how could somebody just be killed just because they're leaving Islam? And like I said, this is a very controversial issue, this last point. And you find that a lot of people, they try to like sugarcoat it. They try to say, oh, it's treason and it's this. This is only when somebody goes against the society. But that goes against the consensus of the scholars. I mean, like you have some of the Hanafi scholars, they've mentioned that if the apostate is a woman, then she's just going to be imprisoned and she won't be killed. But besides that, the majority of scholars, they mentioned that, if you're a man or woman, then you're going to be getting it. If you come out in the society openly saying that you're a non-Muslim, then you're going to get this death penalty. Now, obviously, before, we need to kind of pump the brakes before we, talk about this issue so that we can understand this. If you're a Muslim and you believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows everything, if you're a Muslim and you know and you believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all wise, then whether you understand the wisdom of something or you don't understand it, as a Muslim your belief necessitates that whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decrees, that there's wisdom behind it. And I'm going to give you an example, even in your day-to-day life, where there are certain wisdoms that you don't understand, but later on you do understand them. I'm going to give you an example. Sometimes you have young people, right? And I'm pretty sure if you guys are parents, I'm pretty sure you've advised your children with things in the past and they're like, that doesn't make any sense. But then when they fall into the problem, then they realize, whoa, that was wise, I shouldn't have done that. Right? So you have young people, when they don't heed the advice of others, they may think that there's no wisdom in it. So in our lives, do we look at things that even people say and we negate the wisdom that the speech of people entail? Absolutely. So sometimes you may look at a verse of the Quran, you may look at a hadith or a ruling in the Sharia, and you may say that this doesn't make sense. I don't see the wisdom behind this. But that doesn't mean that there is no wisdom, right? Your lack of understanding the wisdom does not necessitate that there is no wisdom, right? If you don't understand it, doesn't mean that it's not there. Right? If you've never seen it, doesn't mean that it's not there, right? Like that's like somebody saying, oh, I've never seen this country, it doesn't exist. Right? It doesn't make any sense. So just because you don't see the wisdom behind it, doesn't mean that there's no wisdom behind it. Now obviously, if you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you have to believe that these are the best things for society. That through this, the society will run in the most optimal way. Now the scholars, they mention many wisdoms behind this. Like, why is there this, this punishment of a person if they leave Islam? Like I said, it's only to be done in a Muslim society ruled by a Muslim authority, not in a non-Muslim country. Very important to understand. So in a Muslim society, the scholars, they mentioned that what are the wisdoms why the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that third category of people, the one who leaves his deen and separates from the jama'ah. And the scholars mentioned that the wisdom is in the hadith itself. The Prophet ﷺ described the person that leaves his deen in a Muslim society as a person who is tarikun lil jama'ah, somebody who leaves the jama'ah, leaves the group of the Muslims. And the scholars mentioned that because this will cause, dissension in the Muslim society, this is going to cause separation in the Muslim society, and it goes against unity. That's why there is this ruling that's enacted. And like I said, if this ruling is to be, it's to be implemented in a Muslim society ruled under Muslim authority, Islamic authority. If you're thinking about leaving Islam, then why are you in a Muslim society in the first place, right? Why in a Muslim society in the first place? In most cases, if somebody wants to leave, they want to leave Islam, in most cases, they don't want to be ruled under Islamic law in the first place, right? So for example, if you have somebody who has left an Islamic ruled area, right, or like an Islamic country, and they move somewhere else, then they're under, that authority. They're in those lands. So the thing is that under the Muslim authority in a Muslim country, like the time of the Prophet ﷺ, only then can these things be carried out. Only then can these things be carried out. So let's get some questions, inshallah ta'ala, some comments, anything that you guys want to ask, inshallah ta'ala. Anyone? Come on, I'm pretty sure you guys are thinking about a lot of things. Come on, let's talk about it, let's discuss, inshallah. Don't feel shy. It's fine, we're just discussing. Anyone? Yes? Sure. The thing is, like I said, accusing somebody of drinking alcohol, like I said, there's repercussions on that. Let me just make this one point very quick, and that is, we've mentioned that if somebody accuses somebody of zina, then they're going to get the 80 lashes, right? Obviously, if you're living in a non-Muslim country, nobody's going to give you those 80 lashes, right? So that's why you find it's very common that it's very easy for them to accuse their brothers and sisters, and to accuse people, in general, of committing zina. Right, like you've committed zina, you've done this, you've done that. Now obviously they're not going to get the 80 lashes because they're not living under an Islamic authority, but it's still a great sin, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions at the end of the verse, وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ, and those are the rebellious ones against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah has called them the fasiqun, those who are divinely disobedient. So the thing is that whether you don't get it in this life, perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may give you that punishment in the akhirah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive all of us if we've ever fallen into that action. But when it comes to this particular issue, as long as you don't see the person that has actually done the act. Because if a person's wobbling around and they're moving around, Allahu A'lam, maybe the person could be sleepy, maybe the person could have been drugged, maybe the person, like many things could have happened. Now obviously if the person said, yeah, I drank alcohol, that's one thing. You don't need any witnesses for that because that person is confessing, right? They're confessing to the crime, that's different. But if the person does not confess and you haven't seen that they've done the act, then you're to make excuses for that person, right? You shouldn't think badly of your brothers and sisters unless there's clear evidence for that. Okay, so even if the person's wobbling around, they may be sleepy, somebody may have drugged them, somebody may have, done something to them, right? Maybe they're injured or something. Maybe somebody hit them in the head and they're all loopy, right? But like I said, if the person said, yeah, I'm drunk, then that changes the whole situation. Yeah, people admit it all the time. Like, yeah, man, I drank last night. I had this. I was out with the boys last night, and we had this, and we went to the bar, and we got wasted, we got drunk. Like people, it's not even like an issue for them. They don't even care. Obviously, people who don't care about Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, that's the attitude that they have. But like I said, you can't do anything about that. You don't have any authority to do anything about that, right? But can you say that, yeah, this guy drank alcohol? Yeah, you can. Should you spread it around? No, because first of all, there's no benefit in that. You're just harming the reputation of somebody. And the general rule is when it comes to you seeing the sins of a Muslim, you should try to conceal it. You should try to conceal it, yeah. You don't know that. You don't know that. You can't say that he's drunk, right? Maybe he's sick. Maybe, some people that have, diseases that cause them to move in a certain way. Like there's a guy we saw today, and this guy, he's like all over the place. I'm pretty sure you guys have seen him. It's like this guy, he walks and he dances. Has anybody ever seen this guy around? All over the street, right? He's like on Hillside Avenue, he's on Jamaica, he's all over the place. And I've seen him like at least 4 or 5 times, right? I think it's amazing that some of you have never seen him, but today we saw him. We were driving on 165th Street, and it was like Archer Avenue, and he was over there. He was like spinning around out of the tunnel, and he was doing. Perhaps the person, he has a mental problem, right? He may not be drunk. You can't say the person is drunk. You don't know that if you drank alcohol. So, you can't assume. You can only make a judgment on somebody in Islam if you have clear evidence for that. Okay. Anyone else? Anyone else? That's it. So we're gonna stop here. Yes.
If you have like a camera and you record, like if you know that someone is committing zina, for example, right? But you're the only witness. So, I mean, let's say you caught them more than once, right? Let's say you caught them more than once. So you know that they're probably gonna do it again, and you put a camera or something. And would that be considered evidence? Like, I know you need the 4 people, but if it's clear in the video,
yeah.
Then
so this was an issue that I did a bit of research on a while ago, and that is, we need 4 witnesses to affirm that somebody is committing zina in Islam for them to get that punishment under an Islamic, rulership. What if it's caught on camera, right? It's a security camera, and the camera, I mean, like, forget 4 witnesses who are telling you about it happening, that they've seen it. You can see it on the cameras, you're seeing it on the CCTV, whatever the case is. You see the act is taking place. Now, would the person get the death penalty? Allahu A'lam. But one of the scholars, they mentioned certain problems about that. They mentioned certain problems as to why that would not be considered evidence. Could it be used as additional evidence? Absolutely. But when it comes to a person getting that penalty, 4 witnesses still need to be seeing that act taking place. And the scholars, they mention many reasons why. They say because when it comes to video, when it comes to technology, this stuff can be manipulated. Nowadays they have technology where they could put your face on somebody's face in a video and it could look like you're talking. Right? I forgot what this technology is called, but like, we're getting so good at this stuff that with video editing and all these things, that it could be you in the video, but not be you at the same time. So because of stuff like that, the scholars mentioned that it should not be relied upon as initial evidence when it comes to accusing somebody. As supporting evidence, that's one thing, right? But to say that, oh, this person it has been seen on camera and they've done the act of zina, and you don't have those 4 witnesses, then Allahu A'lam. I don't know if there's any scholars that say that they that would be used as evidence and that would suffice, but you still would need those 4 witnesses according to the scholars that I've read from, inshallah ta'ala. Anyone else? So we're going to stop here, inshallah ta'ala. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.